to give everybody a moment just to join in. Very excited to be sharing this with you guys. I know that this is a huge challenge that we're seeing worldwide right now because of many different factors. And today we're going to cover a lot to do with the subconscious mind and really, really important key points that deal with root causes leading to burnout. So as we give a moment for everybody to join in, if you are joining in and would like to share where you're coming from, where you're tuning in from, I'm very happy to be able to be here with you guys today. So I'm just going to give everybody a couple of moments. Welcome, everybody. Hello. Nice to see you. And give everybody just another moment. Hi, Dean. How are you? Okay, so I'm going to get started. I see we're live on all platforms. Hello, Zev. Welcome. Tuning in from New Haven. Wonderful. Nice to have you here. Very excited to be sharing this with everybody. So I'm going to dive in. Hello from the Bahamas. Welcome. Happy to see you guys. So today we're going to be talking a lot about chronic stress and burnout. And we know based on so many different things that have happened over the past couple of years, especially, we've seen a massive increase in burnout in the workplace, in people's individual and personal lives. And if you don't know too much about me already, my name is Thais Gibson, and I am the founder of the Personal Development School. It's a platform that we have about 10,000 students who are current active members. We've had about 25,000 students through our platform over the past few years. And we have a variety of different courses and teachings we use to specifically target the subconscious mind. So a little bit about my background is I have done a master's degree in transpersonal counseling and over 13 different certifications, including certifications in cognitive behavioral therapy, neurolinguistic programming. And something that really stood out to me in my individual practice was how the conscious mind cannot outwill or overpower the subconscious mind. And so when we really want to target things and create real and lasting change, we need to be able to target the subconscious mind as a whole. And so a lot of what you're going to see in our presentation today is not just addressing burnout and the impact of burnout, but also addressing how burnout affects the subconscious mind. So this will help you walk away at the end of today with real tangible tools and ideas that you can take into your workplace for your employees or your colleagues and coworkers to create benefit. And if this is something that you are personally and individually struggling with, this will be of tremendous benefit to understand what's going on inside of you as an individual as well. So today we're going to be covering, first and foremost, a little bit about what burnout is. Then we're going to discuss the 5 stages of burnout so we can learn to recognize burnout at an earlier stage and really be able to pivot and use the different tools and patterns that you'll be learning about to apply to our lives and stop the cycle of burnout from carrying to the later stages where it can be more difficult to reverse. Then we're going to discuss the core root causes of burnout. And I can't specify this enough. I've, had a lot of conversations with individuals. I worked in private practice for the better part of a decade and worked with about 40 clients a week and saw a lot of different individuals and the different patterns they have and how we show up. And I really believe that, again, until we target the subconscious level of mind, sometimes we just have more coping mechanisms, right? Like we can sort of have these surface level coping mechanisms like get enough sleep, get enough rest. But it's like, well, how come I'm burned out and I'm having such a difficult time recovering? And there are actually really core root programs that are taking place that when we disrupt those, we can see lasting change. So we're really going to go into some root causes here today. We're going to discuss external factors and internal factors, and then how to create powerful and lasting change. So this is the best definition I found of burnout, and I really want to highlight this main piece in here. You're going to see this come up a lot today in the next bit of our presentation, and it's that burnout is a state of physical or emotional exhaustion that also involves a sense of reduced accomplishment and even loss of personal identity. Burnout is not a medical diagnosis, and some experts think that other conditions such as depression may be behind burnout. And this is the definition according to the Mayo Clinic. Now, I really want to highlight in here that burnout is a state of physical emotion or emotional exhaustion. You're going to see how this ties in significantly throughout our presentation for today. So the 5 stages of burnout at work. Stage number one starts with the honeymoon stage. And this can be sort of the insidious part of burnout because we may not realize when burnout's really creeping in. And usually, what happens is somebody in the honeymoon stage of burnout gets really excited about maybe a new job that they just received or maybe a new project that they're working on, and they've started sort of down this track. And often burnout actually starts with a sense of job satisfaction, a degree of accepting responsibility, having increased creativity, productivity, and even optimism. And then we get to the stage where we start having the onset of stress. And this may be between the honeymoon stage and the onset of stress stage, a boundary related issue that we are going to talk about in a little bit here. But we'll often see things like reduced sleep quality beginning, irritability, anxiety, even a withdrawing and a lack of social interaction or neglect of personal needs. Then we see the chronic stress stage of burnout, which is characterized by persistent tiredness, procrastination, feeling pressured, taking on activities that are numbing activities or avoidance activities or behaviors, and apathy. Then we see the burnout stage itself. And this is once we hit the burnout stage, is characterized also by having a longer period of time where recovery is necessary to get back to a balanced state. And in this burnout stage, we may see characteristics like obsession with problems, even gastrointestinal issues can be quite common, a pessimistic outlook, a lot of self-doubt, isolation, neglect of self and needs yet again, and behavioral changes and even greater forms of escapism. And then we get into a habitual burnout, which is characterized by chronic sadness, mental fatigue, physical fatigue, and even depression. And this is when we really haven't been able to find resources to make those internal changes. And we just sort of live in this state of burnout, and our productivity is diminished. And we often see a lot of individuals staying in this state where they also have a lot more procrastination taking place, and a lot less fulfillment in the workplace. And we usually see employees leave an organization in the chronic stress stage, the burnout stage, but especially in the habitual burnout stage, because they realize I can't live like this any longer. This isn't healthy for me. This isn't working. Now, according to the Harvard Business Review, the cost of burnout in the workplace is actually 22% of revenue month over month. And this was measured by the amount of procrastination, the amount of late deadlines, specifically determined by employees who were reporting being burnt out. But especially a huge component of that 22% is the amount of employee turnover. And we often see that if people are burnt out, it's much easier to cut and run. And a lot of people, before they actually get to the stage of burnout, they realize, I'm exhausted. I can't do this any longer. They feel trapped a lot of the time. They feel like they don't have better solutions. And so often what happens is they just decide, okay, well, then I need to leave my job. I need to look for something else. And one of the most interesting things we've seen in the past 2 years, especially, is the great resignation, this massive amount of employee turnover that's basically been unprecedented. And a lot of these reports, when you dig into deeper research about this, have to do with the fact that employees reported being so burnt out. And what I want to really stress and highlight here, because these are our major root causes, is that burnout is not always caused by overworking. I think that we often find this very sort of surface level concept or idea that says, hey, when people are burnt out, it's because they're working too much, but it's not that simple. The number of hours working does not necessarily determine how burnt out a person becomes. And you can probably reflect on this within your own life or in the lives of other people that surround you, people that you know. So for example, 50 hours of work per week may be extremely difficult for one person. And 50 hours of work for another person may be a cakewalk by comparison. I know for myself, I generally work a little bit more than 50 hours a week, but I absolutely love what I do. I love my business. I love the people I work with. And for me, 50 hours seems like in my spare time, sometimes I'm like, I wonder if I should pick up more work. And I have so much passion for it. And I've seen other individuals in different organizations that are just absolutely depleted by a 40-hour work week. And so what I want to share with you is that it's not the amount of time worked. Yes, that can play a contributing factor, but to a very small degree. And today I really want to discuss with you real in-depth root causes and share powerful solutions to create lasting internal change. And I want to reflect back on this idea here today, because this is going to be the main theme I'm going to share with you, which is that burnout is characterized, that Mayo Clinic definition I shared with you, by a state of physical and emotional exhaustion. So At a more surface level, we have major external factors, and we're going to cover 10 external factors about our external environment and some potentially challenging dynamics that can exist within a workplace environment that we should all be aware of, either as employees or employers, so that we can disrupt these patterns and create change. But then we're going to do the real deep work, and this is going to be all about the internal factors. And there are three major points I want to cover with you here today as it relates to internal factors and really the impact of this on the subconscious mind and why this is so important. And it's that when employees have unmet needs in the workplace, it makes a massive impact on how they feel empowered, recharged, and their ability to stay focused, show up, and avoid things like procrastination and self-sabotage. We're going to talk about poor boundaries in the workplace and sometimes of our subconscious patterns that show up when it relates to our poor boundaries. And then we're going to talk about limiting beliefs and specifically how we can tweak these things at a subconscious level. And what I think is very valuable and very important is when burnout is becoming such a major issue in the workplace today, we don't want to just target it by simply looking at external factors. We want to look at the external factors that we can work through and tweak these external environments. But we also really want to be able to provide employees with better resources to personally break through limitations that are taking place internally. So we're going to really do a deep dive into a lot of these things. Now, our external factors. Here are the most often reported external factors. This was done by a Gallup survey of over 10,000 individuals who reported being burnt out. And they ranked in no particular order, but these were some of the major external factors taking place. Number one, too high of demands. Okay. And when we look at too high of demand, sometimes this can be a communication issue. Sometimes this can be a boundary issue. Sometimes this can be an expectation issue where there's a lack of clarity in these different dynamics. And being clear about how this shows up in the environment plays a crucial role. Number two, confusing interactions. I have found, as somebody who also currently owns a business myself, and we have about 20 or so employees, 25 employees with our contractors, I have found the impact of when we have confusing interactions and we aren't clear about exactly what we're expecting from a deliverable perspective, the dates, the deadlines. When there's a lack of clarity, this can cause people to get into a state of learned helplessness and feel very disempowered, which we're really going to talk about in a little bit because it relates to more of our internal relationship to how that takes place and how that affects us neurochemically, how that affects us at a nervous system level, and how this affects us at a limiting belief level and emotional level. Poor leadership and collaboration. This can be a huge factor in terms of burnout, especially if people are not feeling inspired by their leaders, especially if people are not feeling like they can trust their leaders, their supervisors, their managers. And if there's a poor or disempowering relationship there, it can really weigh on other individuals in the organization. Then we've talked about unmet needs. And this is specifically from the environment itself. Okay, so this is if we don't have individuals who are leading, especially mid-level managers who are helping their employees to feel seen, to feel heard, to feel appreciated and connected. A lot of reports also demonstrated a sense of pressure, a lack of freedom, poor communication, a lack of resources, a lack of teamwork, and negative feedback. Okay. And when these things are taking place in a person's external environment, they've been demonstrated to really weigh heavily, making employees feel disempowered, exhausted, and often much more easily burnt out. Now, I want to dive into the really important stuff here, okay? So we'll come back and we'll talk about the external factors and some ways of disrupting the patterns at the end. But what I really want to touch on are our internal factors. So I want to start with internal factor number one, and this is our unmet needs. And I really want to talk to you here about how this affects us at the subconscious level and why this means so much. So what I want you to first know is that we have the model. And if you've ever seen this before, this originated way back with Freud. And Freud had this iceberg diagram. And he compared the conscious and subconscious mind to an iceberg, where we have the conscious mind, which is just the tip of the iceberg that peaks above the water level. And then we've got the subconscious mind, which is this massive structure beneath the surface. And what we know is that our subconscious mind is responsible for 95 to 97% of our belief patterns, our thought patterns, our emotions, and our actions or behaviors. And so we can use the acronym BTEA to remember this. We're going to come back to this in a little while and unpack it. And what I want you to know that's extremely meaningful is that the conscious mind cannot outwill or overpower the subconscious mind. And the subconscious mind is designed sort of for your survival. It's like a needs meeting machine. And so if you've ever had the experience of setting a New Year's resolution, and research shows, statistics show that over 88% of people fail their New Year's resolution within the first 7 days of starting it. Why is that number so large? Well, because if we set a goal, oftentimes this process takes place at the level of the conscious mind. The conscious mind says, I'm going to go to the gym more often. I'm going to save more money. I'm going to eat healthier food. But then the subconscious mind, when it has a different set of needs that it's prioritizing, will say, hey, we're not interested in that. We're interested in hanging out with friends. We're interested in spending time with family. We're interested in comfort, security, relaxing. So you can experience this war between your conscious and subconscious mind, where your conscious mind intends one thing, and maybe it does some of this stuff for about 3% of the time. But then we have that major structure and function of the subconscious mind that has completely different intentions, that's pulling you back in different directions. And this is where we see people struggling with follow through on different things. I've always said in the personal development school with our students that there's no real such thing as self-sabotage. All that's actually happening when we're experiencing self-sabotage or procrastination is that our conscious mind is intending one thing and our subconscious mind is quote unquote sabotaging it, but really it's just winning the battle. And so when we wonder, why am I sabotaging, this project, or why am I procrastinating on this thing that I know I have to get done? Your conscious mind knows, but your subconscious is pulling you in this different direction. And so when we are not aligned with our needs, we experience a lot more resistance, a lot more frustration, a lot more burnout, a lot more self-sabotage and procrastination. But when we are aligned with our needs, research demonstrates conclusively and extensively that we have a greater ability to focus, a greater ability to be more present, a greater ability and capacity to access a state of flow. If you've ever heard about flow states, where we feel very extremely present and on and resilient and focused and have a greater ability to adapt. And so when we are aligned with our needs, we show up as our best selves and we diminish that feeling of resistance, and we can show up and really be empowered to do the work that we're doing. And so what's extremely important is that if we realize that we have employees, or if we realize that ourselves as an employee are not showing up to our fullest potential, this is one of the major, most important factors as to why. And so what we can realize here that's very valuable as well is that whenever we have unmet needs, your mind is designed to produce a feeling of subtle pain. And this is a biology dynamic where if let's just scale this way back for a moment, if you have hunger pain, that helps you go seek food and be able to hunt down food and survive. If you have the discomfort of thirst, then you seek water. If you have the discomfort of cold, you seek to set up shelter. Pain is there to help us adapt and evolve. But what happens a lot of the time is we're no longer living in this survival-oriented world. So what actually happens is we have unmet needs in the workplace, for example, or in any area of our lives, and our subconscious mind will produce a subtle pain response. If those needs are not then met and that dynamic is not corrected so that we can adapt, then we experience more subtle and chronic emotional distress. And remember, what did we start with today? We started with talking about how burnout is a state of physical and emotional exhaustion. And so as we go through this dynamic of experiencing subtle emotional pain that's there to bring us feedback, hey, you have unmet needs that are taking place in the workplace. Your subconscious mind is doing this for you, but it can create a lot of distress until we become consciously aware of the fact that this process is taking place, and then do the work to assist our subconscious in identifying and meeting those needs so that we can see transformation, release that feeling of discomfort or pain, and actually feel more empowered, more aligned, more focused, and more resilient in the workplace. So here's something else you need to know as well as we talk about this dynamic of unmet needs. When we have unmet needs, it produces and emotional response, okay, as I've just touched on. Now, neuroscience has conclusively proven, and this was by a neuroscientist named Antonio Damasio. This was he won a prize for this in 2008. And neuroscience determined that every single decision we make is actually based on our emotional state. So even those of us who think we're very logical, rational thinkers in the workplace, we're actually making very emotionally based decisions. And then we are just quick to rationalize or justify those decisions through logic, which means if we're not really feeling good emotionally, we're less likely to take productive actions in the workplace. So something that can be extremely important is to start by identifying our unmet needs in the workplace. And also, if we are a manager, if we run an organization, if we are an employer of any kind, to also notice your key players in the workplace and to start to recognize how these different key players actually have very specific needs that drive them. Now, there are many different needs. We have about 30 major different needs that are related to the workplace, but I just wanted to give you a sample of 10 major needs here. And these are the most common ones. And what I want you to be able to do here is take a moment and determine who in your workplace, if you're an employer, do you see struggling? Maybe not showing up in the same way that you're used to them showing up. Maybe you see them in some sort of specific dynamic, seeming more burnt out, even reporting to you personally that they're burnt out. And you can also take a look internally and try to decipher, okay, well, what about myself? Is there a time that I felt burnt out, or am I feeling burnt out to some degree right now? And if so, what needs may be missing from my workplace that I can intentionally introduce? And if you pay close attention to your coworkers, your colleagues, you will come to notice that individuals are driven by vastly different needs. We have a sample of these needs here. Now, you may see individuals in your workplace, and you can probably think of this, that are very driven by certainty. They want a lot of clarity. They want very clear instructions. They sometimes sort of fall into a state of learned helplessness when they don't have clear instructions. And they want to also know that they are in an organization that will provide long-term stability. And you may even find that these employees are a little bit change adverse. And maybe this is something that you can sort of notice about yourself. And what I want you to see here is what happens when your conscious mind says, I'm going to do something outside of my comfort zone. But if you have strong needs at a subconscious level that are related to certainty, then you're going to find that you're in this push-pull dynamic. You say you're going to create change, you say you want to try something new and stretch outside of your comfort zone, but you may have more resistance if you have a very high certainty need at the subconscious level that's driving your behavior. Then we have other employees. If to juxtapose that, we have other employees who are very driven by variety. You may find that they easily get bored with doing repetitive tasks. These are also individuals who are less likely to be detail-oriented in the workplace. You may find that they're always trying to take on new projects and try new things, but may even lack follow-through because their subconscious mind is so focused on variety. There are other individuals in the workplace that respond extremely well to acknowledgement and are really driven to show up and perform more effectively when they are acknowledged. And we see other individuals that don't care so much for acknowledgement. That's not something that's driving them. We see certain individuals that are very driven by learning, other individuals that are very driven by self-expression. They really want their opinions, their ideas to be seen and heard and validated in the workplace. They may even have sort of a creative side to them, and they really want to express their ideas creatively in the workplace. Then we may see other individuals that are constantly seeking growth and empowerment. They may want to know that they're stretching themselves and achieving and creating improvements. We have other individuals who are very driven by connection and who are constantly seeking to be client facing in their role, who are constantly seeking to be able to interact with others, who excel in team building environments and activities, and when there's a lot more collaboration. And then we have other individuals who are very driven by stability and comfort, and other individuals who really need their independence and autonomy, and then others who are also very driven by trust. So these are some of the major needs that drive different individuals. And it's not just one. We don't just have one specific need that makes us feel the most empowered in the workplace. We may have a combination, but it's generally our top 3 to 4 needs that drive us the most. Now, what I want to demonstrate here is that if we have our conscious mind that's going, you know what, I really want to do something different. My boss gave me feedback that I'm not creating enough change. I'm not taking on enough new projects. But we have somebody who is getting that feedback constantly, or perhaps is just in an environment where there's a need for constant change and variety and a lot of novelty dynamics. So let's say somebody's in a startup. If this individual is very certainty seeking at a subconscious level, very stability and comfort seeking at a subconscious level, then they're going to struggle a little bit more in that organization until the organization understands this about them and finds different strategies to get these needs met in different ways. Perhaps creates a good structure for them or schedule for them, or perhaps lets them know, you know what, you're doing very well. I appreciate what you're bringing to the table. And we can definitely provide a long-term role for you here. We have other individuals who they may be in an organization that has a lot of very specific measures and a lot of red tape, and is very slow to change and adapt. And if somebody's very variety seeking or novelty seeking in this organization, they may feel disempowered. You may see them sometimes rebelling a little bit. And if we can find healthy ways to get their variety needs met within the organization, you'll see less procrastination, less self-sabotage, greater ability to focus, and so on. So it's really important to be able to identify what somebody's unmet needs are and get really clear on how we can cater to those needs and how we can create healthy strategies for those individuals to get those needs met in different ways, so that we can stay focused, stay resilient, and stay in our ability to grow within an organization itself. Now, we could do a much deeper dive into needs. There's certain questionnaires we can go through and all these sorts of things to clearly determine, but I'll give a little bit of tools at the end, and we also have a free offer to share with you guys at the end as well, if you want to do a much deeper dive into these things and get your hands on like very in-depth resources where there's questionnaires and specific outputs and specific strategies tailored to each set of needs as well. So that's internal factor number one. Then we go to internal factor number two, and this is our boundaries. Now, what I want you to understand about the subconscious mind, as we talk a lot about the subconscious mind here today, is that the subconscious mind is programmed through repetition plus emotion. So as we grow up and as we go through life, it can be at any stage of our adult lives, our childhood, we basically get imprinted. Okay. And imprinted really means that we get exposed to experiences repetitively. Let's just say, for example, that you have a very authoritarian parent, a very strong parent who plays a very strong role, and they're very strict and maybe a little bit controlling. If you're a child that grows up in this household, you may learn that when I try to set a boundary or try to say no to this authoritarian parent, I get in trouble. And so the subconscious mind, which is programmed through repetition plus emotion, over time will come to realize setting boundaries doesn't work for me, but people pleasing does. People pleasing gets my needs met. When I people please my authoritarian parent, my needs get met more often. So basically, repetition and emotion fires and wires neural pathways. And what takes place over time is through repetition and emotion, we get exposed to these adaptations we make. We learn, oh, people pleasing is good. It gets my needs met. Well, maybe in childhood it gets your needs met, but maybe in your adult life, this is going to create a wonderful recipe for chronic burnout. And when we look at this dynamic, something that's very interesting that research has demonstrated over and over again is that our relationship to our boundaries often begins in our own childhood's stored subconscious experiences. So what this really means is that a lot of the time, because we see our authority figures in the workplace, our managers, our supervisors, our founders in the workplace, we often put them, and the subconscious mind is also an association making machine. So we often put them in this category at a subconscious level where they are the authority. Well, what are our stored subconscious memories and associations about authority figures? Oh, our parents. So often, believe it or not, and I have found this time and time again with our thousands of students in the personal development school, as well as hundreds and hundreds of individuals I worked with in client-based practice, that a lot of our unresolved childhood experiences with our caregivers get projected onto our authority figures in the workplace. And what I have found is that there are four major types of relationships people have to their own boundaries. And there are certain benefits and drawbacks of each to certain degrees, but we really want to be able to isolate the drawbacks and create healthy strategies to break through these drawbacks. So number one, we have the people pleaser. And the people pleaser often comes out of some sort of dynamic where they learned I people please and that gets my needs met. That's how I stay safe. Then we have number two, the extreme boundary setter. And the extreme boundary setter can be a little bit harsh or blunt with their boundaries. And sometimes the way that they can be so extreme with their boundaries and say, no, I'm not doing that, and be very direct and to the point. Sometimes people who are people pleasers or people who, are a little bit more sensitive to person interactions can be sort of hurt by that and feel kind of like, why did you speak to me this way? That was very hurtful, that you came on too strong. So we can see some of these different dynamics exist within these individual personality types. Then we have the swinging pendulum boundary setter. And this is the individual. And again, as you're hearing this, I want you to try to reference, like, is this me? Is this somebody I know? This is the person who will often be starting off on the people pleasing foot and people please, people please, people please. But guess what people pleasing does for a lot of us if left unresolved? We people please until we get resentful. We people please until we're like, hey, I'm forgotten about here. And then we feel frustrated. And then the swinging pendulum boundary setter will often have a bit of an angry outburst. And it doesn't have to be like an actual outburst. It can be like, a passive aggressive comment or, a really strong boundary, or maybe blaming somebody or taking out their frustration on somebody else in the workplace. So we have the swinging pendulum as the person that often will people please, and then set extreme boundaries that are usually coupled with a little bit of resentment, frustration, or anger towards other individuals that they're working around. And then we have the stable boundary setter. And this is where we're trying to move towards. Okay. And this is the person that sets boundaries, feels comfortable setting boundaries, does set boundaries in a healthy, repetitive way, doesn't set extreme boundaries all the time, but sets reasonable boundaries and is open to negotiation in healthy forms. And these four main personality types and sets of boundaries were actually based off of attachment theory, which has been studied for about 100 years. And so we see these different dynamics associated with each of these different major attachment styles. I'm not going to go into that right now, but it's useful to know that this is based on extensive research. Now, what we see is that people pleasers and swinging pendulums are most likely to leave organizations without communicating. And here's why. If you learned in your childhood, for example, that when I try to set boundaries, I get in trouble, then your subconscious mind represses any positive reinforcement around setting boundaries. It actually believes that, hey, when I set boundaries, I only get negative outcomes. So it represses this idea that I even can set boundaries. It's almost out of my awareness. And so what often happens is the people pleaser and swinging pendulums, they feel kind of helpless and powerless when it comes to boundaries. They feel sort of stifled in their ability to communicate and to speak up. And what this is again, an expression of the conscious versus subconscious mind. We have the conscious mind that's going, I'm not getting my needs met at work. I don't feel seen or heard. I feel overwhelmed. I'm taking on too much work. Everybody's putting their work on me and I can't say or do anything about it. And the subconscious mind is like, that's too bad. The subconscious mind isn't like, hey, let's set boundaries. The subconscious mind is like, you're right, you can't do anything about it. And we easily descend into learned helplessness. And so what I want you guys to recognize here is that there are ways we can reprogram these dynamics and relationships to our own boundaries at the subconscious level. Now, I'm not going to get into this too much today, but I want you to start by identifying, who am I in my relationship to boundaries? Who are some of my coworkers in the relationship to their boundaries? I can remember working with one client specifically, and we'll call this client Janet. And I won't share the real names of individuals, but I remember she said to me, and she was a very smart, very well-educated woman, and she said to me, I've been working in the same role for 10 years, helping everybody with their work all around me over and over again, watching all these people ascend up the corporate ladder. And I've been staying here, staying the same. And what was happening to this woman is she felt so disempowered to set boundaries because she came from a household where she had very strict parents. She couldn't speak up. She couldn't set boundaries and felt, very punished and unsafe if she did so. And so she just felt like, I have to sort of put up with whatever comes my way. I can't say no to people. And so she would see tons of people coming to her for help. She was the person everybody went to. She would help them with all their work. She would help them meet their deadlines. And then her work would suffer. And it dramatically affected her ability to ascend and grow as well. And this individual, when she came to me, said to me, like, I think I'm done at my workplace. I can't keep watching everybody else ascend. Meanwhile, this was an internal boundary issue. And once we helped her reprogram her relationship to boundaries, she was able to speak up, to say no in a very healthy, kind, respectful manner to her coworkers. excel in her work for the first time in a decade, and eventually get promoted to a better role. So try to notice, who am I with my boundaries? How does being very strong with my boundaries, where I set my boundaries in extremes, maybe impact other people and how they feel? Maybe they feel like I'm too blunt with my boundaries, and how might that feel from somebody else's perspective? Or more importantly, if I'm somebody who's the people pleaser or the swinging pendulum, how is this affecting me in the workplace? And who are you? Who are your employees? And can you guess who gets burned out the most? Obviously, we have the people pleasers and the swinging pendulums. And again, these individuals are the most likely to leave because their subconscious mind doesn't see another way out. And that's what learned helplessness is when we consciously know there's a problem and our subconscious mind doesn't know how to solve for it because we have disempowering programs that are working against us. And so the mind finds this extreme exit strategy, like, okay, I can't take this. I've had enough. We have enough pain with the situation, and we just cut and run. But we can solve these things internally. We can change the impact of being so burned out and exhausted by having such poor boundaries and having so many people put things on our plate and not being able to say no. And we can learn to excel in the workplace, stay more focused, more productive, and feel actually fulfilled by the work that we're doing when we know what we can say yes and no to. So very, very important. Internal factor number 3 is all about our limiting beliefs. So before I get into explaining limiting beliefs, what I want you to know is a few key things. And I want to share this 2-minute video with you. It's such a beautiful and powerful video. And this video is designed to demonstrate the way that the subconscious mind gets programmed over time. Okay. This video actually comes from, I was recently on a presentation that we did for Google and their employees. And I stole this from part of their presentation that I worked with them on. So I just have to give them some credit. One of the individuals who worked there shared this. And I was like, this is one of the best just videos that clearly articulates and demonstrates like how limiting beliefs affect us. So the presentation was about gender equity in finance and how the subconscious mind as a female can be so profoundly impacted by the messaging we receive over and over again, and how our childhood, our upbringing, all of these different dynamics that we're exposed to in life actually programs our subconscious mind. And remember, repetition and emotion programs the subconscious mind, and it's firing and wiring these ideas that eventually become our identity. So I'm going to share this 2-minute video, and it will sort of demonstrate the story of a young girl who grows up and how all the messaging she receives creates limiting beliefs that then affect her behaviors and how she shows up. And then we're going to tie this back into burnout in a moment, and how we can have all these limiting beliefs that can really burn us out long term as well.
Say that you have 50 cents and you want to buy an apple for 23 cents. How much change would you get back? Who knows the answer? Elijah?
27 cents?
Very good, Elijah. 27 cents is the correct answer.
Happy birthday, princess. Go and spoil yourself, okay? You like it?
Yeah.
We're gonna get it. Some retail therapy, right?
Right.
Don't tell your dad.
Is that a new jacket? Yep, just a little retail therapy.
Another bill?
Bit of advice, honey. Marry rich.
I picked it out myself.
When it tastes like that, she's gonna put me in the poorhouse. I'm gonna take care of everything.
Here you go, gentlemen.
Thank you so much.
So, as you can see, ceilings, major feature of this property.
Should be an easy fix. I'll send the quote to your husband.
Sounds good.
I mean, yeah, that's Derek. He earns it. I spend it.
Just to clarify, are all your investments held jointly?
talk to your husband about the costs?
Some retail therapy, right? Go spoil yourself.
Say that you have.
So, the point of that video and why I think it's such a beautiful and powerful example is it illustrates the input we get and how the input we receive through repetition over time gives us messaging. And when we get consistent messaging one way or another, it becomes part of our identity at the subconscious level. And I want to share with you an internal factor number 3, the impact of limiting beliefs on the subconscious mind and how we can have limiting beliefs that can impact burnout so tremendously, not just from our emotional state, but also neurochemically and even at the level of our nervous system function. So as you saw in that video, that young woman growing up got all this negative messaging around her ability to manage money. And she had all this variety of different messaging coming in, but it was these same themes, these same internal patterns. And through time, we gain this messaging and it fires and wires these pathways, and we come to believe these things about ourselves. So limiting beliefs have a massive impact, not just on our relationship to money, but our relationship to every single one of the 7 areas of our lives: our career, our finances, our mental space, our emotional space, our physical state, and our relationships as a whole, and even our spiritual area of our lives. So what I want you to start by noticing, and we're going to talk about limiting beliefs, and we're also going to talk of how these things really show up in the workplace, and then a little bit of what we can do from this, is we gather subconscious beliefs about ourselves throughout the course of our lives, and it's based on whatever messaging we get consistently. We can get messaging through what we hear repetitively. Perhaps you heard your parents growing up say, "Oh, we don't have enough money." We can get beliefs through what we see or what's modeled to us. If we constantly see parents who overwork and are in a perpetual state of stress and burnout, that may be what we think our relationship to work is supposed to be like. And then we also get beliefs based on our firsthand experiences. So for example, we may have Maya, let's say, who gets bullied in childhood, and she may come to believe, "Oh, people don't like me. I'm not a likable person." And then when she goes into her workplace, she may throughout the day feel kind of triggered and unsafe and afraid of really connecting with people and speaking up for her needs and setting boundaries because she believes she's unlikable. And so she may just try to cope by staying quiet or avoiding human interaction. So what I want you to see here is that our beliefs impact us in this sort of chain reaction of events. And I often use this acronym, as I mentioned earlier, that talks about the subconscious mind, BTEA. BTEA stands for beliefs, thoughts, emotions, and actions. And I want you to think of your beliefs as being like a tree trunk. So let's say I have this core belief about myself, and let's say I believe that I am not good enough. And this can be from something as simple as just having 1 or 2 critical parents growing up, perhaps just a really critical teacher who impacted me, perhaps a coach, a mentor, somebody who was very critical in my life. And let's say because of this criticism, I learned, okay, well, I'm not good enough. I got this repetitive messaging about what I'm doing wrong or not well enough. Well, if I have this belief, the really interesting thing about this belief is that once it's sort of set in place, it spills out into everything. And you can imagine a tree trunk with tree branches coming off of it. And so I may believe I'm not good enough, and then I'm going to think thoughts, okay? And that's our T of BTEA. And these thoughts may be things like, I'm not smart enough. I'm not interesting enough. I'm not funny enough. I'm not good at public speaking enough. I can have all these thoughts that come off. And then you can think of your emotions kind of like the leaves on the tree. And how do I feel when I'm thinking and believing those thoughts? How do I feel? Let's say I'm driving to a job interview and I'm sitting there going, "Oh my gosh, I'm not good enough. I'm not prepared enough. I'm not smart enough. I'm not qualified enough." If this is what I believe about myself, because the subconscious mind is also designed to focus on negative things more than positive things, because if we focus on the negative more than the positive, we can keep ourselves safer and increase our chances at survival. And it's just how the mind is wired. Well, what happens is I start feeling stress going to that job interview. I start feeling really stressed giving that presentation to my coworkers. I start feeling really stressed speaking at that sales event or whatever it might be. So those belief patterns affect our thought patterns, our emotional patterns. And here's the kicker. Then we know neuroscience has proven that our actions follow our emotional state. Remember Antonio Damasio? He demonstrated conclusively that literally we make all of our decisions based on our emotional state. And then we're just quick to rationalize or justify those things through logic. So when I believe I'm not good enough going into something, how do I cope? Do I self-sabotage? Do I avoid? Do I procrastinate? Do I panic? Do I play small? So our beliefs don't just affect the way we think and the way we feel, but also the way we act. And if we're not in charge of our beliefs, then it has a massive impact on our lives. And here is what also takes place. Your emotions are made up of neurochemical reactions. Okay. If I think positively oriented thoughts, I'm likely to feel more serotonin, the well being neurochemical, more dopamine, the motivation neurochemical, maybe more oxytocin, the bonding neurochemical when I'm spending time around coworkers. If I'm thinking stressful oriented thoughts, I'm likely to produce, if I'm thinking about how I'm not good enough, I'm not prepared enough, I'm not XYZ enough, then I'm more likely to produce cortisol responses. I'm more likely to produce norepinephrine responses. These are our stress neurochemicals. And over time, these neurochemicals really wreak havoc on not just our nervous system, but our nervous system, but also our immune system function. And when we are in a chronic state of believing and thinking negative thoughts about ourselves, especially disempowering ones in the workplace, we feel bad going to work, we feel exhausted going to work, and constant cortisol and norepinephrine exhaust our nervous system over time. They keep us more in sympathetic nervous system, which is our fight and flight state, rather than parasympathetic nervous system mode, which is rest, digest, well-being, feel comfortable, feel open. And it's also correlated with more prefrontal cortex function, which is basically associated with the logical thinking mind, having greater access to more creativity, more good ideas, more insights, more self-awareness. So when we have these really limiting beliefs in our lives, research also shows, and this is based on a study done from the University of Southern California's Neuroimaging Institute, that we think roughly 60 to 70,000 thoughts per day. And roughly 50,000 of those thoughts are recirculated thoughts based on our beliefs that are taking place over and over and over again. So we tend to think and feel in patterns. And when we have negative thought patterns, negative belief patterns about ourselves, these things happen over and over and over again in different forms. So you may feel not good enough in your workplace. You may go home and feel not good enough in your relationships. You may feel not good enough in your relationship to money. You may feel not good enough in your relationship to your friends, to your partner, to your spouse, to your children. So what we want to be able to recognize is that, again, we have a solvable problem here on our hands that may be making a massive impact in a negative way. But when we actually dig into it, all we have to do is reprogram these beliefs. You weren't born with these beliefs. These got imprinted upon you through repetition and emotion, and we can reprogram or deprogram these beliefs using some of those same major themes. So here are some very common limiting beliefs that show up in the workplace, and I'm going to give you a couple examples of how these really take hold. We have, I am not enough. I am disrespected. I am unsafe. I am helpless. We see like unsafe be associated with the people who are always worrying that their job's unsafe, always worrying that they're going to get fired for making mistakes. I am helpless is often associated with states of learned helplessness in the workplace. I am undeserving or unworthy. Usually these individuals are overcompensating. They're trying to pour themselves into things and they don't feel worth asking for the raise or speaking up or asking for the promotion because they have this belief about themselves that they've previously acquired. So they watch everybody else ask for their needs and negotiate raises and then sometimes play small. I will fail. I am shameful. This is often associated with a lot of fear of being shamed, fear of being criticized, being very sensitive and taking criticism very detrimentally. I am disrespected. Sometimes we see these individuals overreact to others in the workplace. I will be rejected. Often these individuals will shy away from social interactions, won't speak up and share their true opinions. I don't matter. Again, if in childhood we didn't get a lot of, or even in previous adult relationship experiences or life experiences, we didn't feel like our opinions were important, that we were seen, that we were heard. We can feel like, oh, I just don't matter. My opinions are irrelevant. My contribution is irrelevant. And again, we can play very small. I am disliked. I have no control. I am excluded. I will be abandoned. Often this is really associated with people being afraid of being let go from the workplace. And I am bad. People who are constantly guilting themselves in a chronic way. And again, a lot of these things are really acquired in the first 8 years of our lives, where we pick up the most programming at the most rapid pace. So I'm going to give you a few examples of this, okay? Because we talked about beliefs, thoughts, emotions, actions, that tree trunk with the tree branches. This is your BTEA in motion. Okay, I'm going to give you some examples here. Let's say Janet makes a mistake at work, and let's say she has this belief about herself that I'm shameful because maybe she got shamed a lot in her childhood, really criticized for making mistakes. So she might believe I am shameful. She may start thinking thoughts like everybody's judging me, everybody's judging me. She may feel the emotions of shame and anxiety along with the neurochemicals that will impact her nervous system that go with this. And she may respond by withdrawing and shutting down. Now, what happens if every time Janet makes a mistake at work, she starts feeling this way? Or how does Janet start feeling about her job in general if she has this belief and then she makes 2 mistakes at work a week and she starts panicking and feeling all of these negative feelings associated with work? She starts feeling resistance to work. The brain is wired to avoid pain and seek pleasure. So once we start feeling like we've got these negative feelings at our workplace, we start avoiding. We start going into the opposite of approach-oriented behaviors. We start hiding, we start withdrawing, we start not being ourselves. And it's all because of not just our external environment, but our internal environment that is changeable once we target these core subconscious pain points. Let's say number 2, we have Bob turns in his report late. And let's say he starts thinking, well, let's say he has this belief that I am unsafe. And that's the one that gets activated. That's the one that gets triggered, that's stored in his subconscious mind. He might start thinking, oh my gosh, I turned in my report late. There's this other new person who might get promoted into my role. Maybe I'm going to get fired. Maybe I'm going to let go from my job. I am unsafe is often going to be the person who catastrophizes a lot in the workplace and fears worst case scenarios. And they'll feel a lot of fear and distress. And this wreaks havoc on our nervous system over time. This exhausts us. And then he may act by seeking validation, being panicky, self-soothing through others, trying to see like, am I okay? Do I still have my job? Kind of overreacting. And he may even find himself staying up at night, losing sleep, ruminating over some of his fears that are taking place. It can be extremely disruptive and of course lead to chronic burnout. Let's say we have Qual who's giving a speech at work. And let's say he has a core belief that says, I will fail. Well, he's going to start feeding into all the reasons he's going to fail. And he's going to stop paying attention to feeling like he can succeed. He's not going to feel really confident. He may start thinking thoughts like, I'm in the wrong line of work. I can't do this. This is too much for me. This isn't the right thing for me. And he's going to start feeling worry, sadness. Maybe he considers leaving a job and feels exhausted and stressed. And this one in particular is actually based on a real life conversation I had with a client from years ago, who basically went through this exact BTEA format. Same with 4 and 5. We're also clients in some of their stories. I've renamed them though, of course. So Nilifer, let's say, receives direct feedback from a coworker who is in a rush. Okay. And maybe this coworker says, hey, I need the report. You didn't turn it. Come on. Can you hurry up, please? And maybe the coworker is just stressed and in a rush themselves. But maybe if Nilifer has this wound and belief about herself that I am disrespected because maybe she felt like she was disrespected by her siblings in childhood or her friends in her upbringing, then she may have that be catalyzed at the subconscious level. And she might be like, who do they think they are? How dare they talk like this to me? And she might feel anger and frustration. And then later on, confront the coworker in a non-constructive manner, or perhaps gossip to other colleagues at work. And you can see how all of these things take our energy, drain our energy. We have negative feelings, negative neurochemical responses. And often this is where our negative behaviors come from, is when we're in a state of coping, not from just an objective external situation, but our internal relationship through our BTEAs at the internal subconscious level. We have the big things triggered, and then we have, remember, neuroscience proved when we have these negative feelings, we tend to have more negatively oriented actions. And then let's say we have Raina, who's confused about an assignment. And maybe she feels like I am helpless. Maybe she starts having this wound where in childhood she felt that way in different experiences she went through. And that's what gets catalyzed in her adult life. And she starts thinking thoughts like, I can't do this. I'm incapable. She starts feeling despair, worry, and then maybe she avoids and procrastinates. And this is where we get into sort of those learned helplessness dynamics. So what I want you to remember here is that burnout is a state of physical and emotional exhaustion. Remember, we keep touching on that from that dynamic. And these internal factors that we're talking about here, the negative belief and thought patterns, the unmet needs, the poor boundaries, these are the internal things that are producing the emotional exhaustion, which then leads to, because we have the emotional output that creates neurochemical reactions that then impact our nervous system, our physical exhaustion. And these are really the core roots of what's taking place at a very deep level. And all of these things are very solvable. So here's what I'm going to give to you. And I'll leave some room here in a few moments for some questions, but I really want to go through a couple things. And there's also a free giveaway at the end here. So what I want you to see is that all of these problems are easily solvable with targeting the subconscious mind. And what you can take away from today, okay? And what I want you to do if you're an employer or if this is for you personally is try to pick like 1 or 2 suggestions from what we've touched on below and see if you can come up with a strategy to make a change. So we started by talking today about our external environment. And we talked about those 10 major factors that can impact us at the external environment level. And what I want you to ask yourself is, what can I improve upon? Perhaps I'm an employer with a whole bunch of employees. Perhaps I lead a team. I'm a manager. What can I improve upon to make the external environment a little bit better? Maybe I can give more positive feedback to my employees. Maybe I can sit with them one-on-one and make sure they feel seen and heard, ask them what their needs are, these sorts of things. Can you get feedback from an internal survey, perhaps? I really believe in this. Can we actually audit? Can we ask questions to the people we're working with and ask them what would help you from an external environment perspective to feel more empowered, to feel more supported in the workplace, to feel more fulfilled? Number 2, we can specifically go into those unmet needs. This is extremely powerful and impactful at the subconscious level. And what I want to ask you is, can you decipher what needs your core team members have around you and what your needs are? Perhaps, hopefully you saw that list of top 10 common needs in the workplace. Then you were able to see, oh my gosh, my one employee really responds well when I acknowledge them. And I'm realizing how impactful that is and how that really ups their game and moves the needle in the workplace. Maybe you see another core team member who you're like, you know what? They always want clarity and certainty about things. And I realize that the more clearly I communicate and the more certainty I provide, the better they work and the more focused and present they become. So can you ask, if you don't know the answer, can you ask for suggestions on how to meet these things as an employer? Can you sit down with your team, bring up that list of the top 10 needs, and you have the recording for this, and can you go through and say, hey, these are some important needs. Can you tell me what yours are and how you would feel like these things are met most often? If you don't have the answer, just go ask a question. Number 3, if you see individuals who are struggling with boundaries, remember we talked about the people pleasers and the pendulum swingers and how they're often the ones to leave the workplace the most because they just feel so helpless and disempowered, and their subconscious mind doesn't usually have even like a good way of showing up and setting those boundaries. So can you identify who struggles to set boundaries the most in your organization? Can you see the people who fear saying no? And maybe they seem like they're people pleasing on the outside, but often on the inside, they're struggling a little bit and they're feeling overwhelmed and they just won't say anything because sometimes they don't even know how to communicate. And if you see individuals getting overwhelmed, falling behind, maybe even just expressing resentment to other coworkers, can you sit down with them one-on-one and say, hey, let's talk about your boundaries. How are you feeling about your workload? Let's put some strategies to help you become better at boundaries in your life and in the workplace. And lastly, can you go into limiting beliefs? Can you take some time and see in people's patterns and internal dialogue or in your own the different dynamics that show up for people in the organization? Do you see people putting themselves down and talking about how they're not good enough? Do you see people talking about how they feel disrespected by everybody in the workplace at different times? Do you see people who are in specific dynamics where you can tell they're so afraid of rejection and don't want to put themselves out there? And if so, can you help them work through these things? Can you give them support and tools and tell them how they are good enough, how they are liked and respected by many employees, how they are accepted in the workplace? And can you share with them feedback about who does think highly of them so we can help work through those beliefs and give them different messaging? And if you can take from this list of 4 major things we covered here today that really talks about burnout at the subconscious internal level. And if you can pick 1 or 2 things, either for yourself as the individual or that you can introduce into your workplace to help create change, these things go a very long way. I can tell you right now, when employees, and I'm telling you this from working with hundreds of people over the years, one-to-one in client-based practice, when employees feel like their boss sits down with them and touches on their needs, discusses with them their boundaries and their workload, makes them feel seen and heard, builds them up in the places where they have these limiting beliefs about themselves, it hits home. And people want to show up. They want to work harder. They want to show up better. They feel seen, heard, cared for. And this really goes a long way, especially nowadays and especially in our current world climate with everything that's been going on. So There are very in-depth subconscious reprogramming tools for each of these major things, especially number 2, 3, and 4. There are ways to reprogram our unmet needs in the relationship to ourselves to get better at communicating them. There are also, if you want to dig a little bit deeper, some really clear boundary setting tools and reprogramming our actual relationship to our boundaries at the subconscious level through something called exposure response work, where we practice doing it incrementally and see the positive results of it. And there are really powerful ways to reprogram your limiting beliefs that you may have been carrying for decades in just a matter of 2.5 short weeks. And you can see these things actually be set to rest once and for all. And it only takes about 5 or 10 minutes a day too. So there's some deeper stuff we can do. This is a really great place to start. If I had 4 hours here, I'd talk about all these things in more detail. But if you would like to go deeper, we have a free offering today, which is to book an onboarding call to qualify for a 30-day pilot program, free trial for all of our resources at the Personal Development School. So we have over 50 different courses that are specifically about targeting the subconscious mind, where we really get to the roots of why these imprints take place. And some of these are just a sample of a few of our courses. We have courses on burnout, self-esteem, and improving our self-esteem, reprogramming and limiting beliefs in general, just a course dedicated to that, overcoming anxiety, depression, working through conflict resolution and proper communication, breaking through self-sabotage and procrastination, a full course just on boundaries and really knowing what our boundaries are, how to set and achieve goals using your subconscious mind and engaging your subconscious in the process. So we really tap into that 95 to 97%. Workplace relationship courses that talk about our different patterns and attachment styles in the workplace and how to really capitalize on our strengths and also reprogram and mitigate our potential challenges. And also courses on social anxiety, life planning, and time management. And there's a whole bunch more. We have over 50. And with our memberships to the Personal Development School, which again, you can access for 30 days risk-free, just as a free trial, is we have 4 live weekly webinars that I host personally and that I do for all of our students every single week on a whole variety of different topics. So people can really take in a lot of information until it's like second nature and very clear. We have 2 daily social events that include study groups, just bonus content, reprogramming routines that engage the subconscious mind, all sorts of exciting things. And we also offer for the company feature personalized reports for employees that talk about engagement, employees' needs. You can get reports on all these different things, working through limiting beliefs. And then we also have regular onboarding and check-in calls with management, all these different things. So you should see right there that you have the opportunity to book an onboarding call with Melanie, one of our team members. It's just at the bottom of your screen. If you want to gain access, check all this stuff out, try it out, see what's there for you. And what I'm going to do now, if we have a little bit of extra time, and hopefully, I see lots of great questions in here. Hi guys, I could only see the presentation before, but I'm going to answer just a couple quick questions in here, so that we can dive into some of this. And then again, there's sort of a deeper dive into a whole bunch of other stuff if you want to. So the first question I see here is from Daniela. Hi Daniela, how are you? So Daniela says, how do you help people see feeling burnt out? Wouldn't harm their future with the company? Great question. So I think what you're sort of referring to is, how do you help people just honor and own that they're experiencing burnout, and to see that, hey, if you share this internally, if you share this with members of your workplace, this isn't going to necessarily harm your future. And so what I'm hearing, Daniela, from your question is that you probably really want to see your employer support this sort of dynamic, right? So if I'm you and I'm feeling burnt out in your company and I'm like, oh no, I can't speak up to anybody, I can't say anything to anybody, this is going to be one of the most destructive things, because over time your subconscious is just going to feel like, I have enough of this, this is too much, this is too exhausting. And then this is where we see a lot of tendency for individuals to kind of cut and run. And so what I would say here is, if you're afraid to communicate, you can sort of buffer out the situation by going problem solution. So what I would highly suggest is, if you need your employer to know you're experiencing burnout, I think it's going to be really important to have that open conversation, and to go into that conversation also equipped ahead of time with solutions. So you may say, for example, to your employer, hey, I'm noticing that I'm experiencing burnout. I know that long-term this will affect my performance, and I don't want us to get to that point. And so what I suggest that we do is, I'm realizing one of the main sources of the burnout is boundaries for me. And I really want to work on boundaries. Here are some initial boundaries I think I would like to set. And you can come up with like 2 or 3 initial things that you think those are. And then I would ask my employer, can you work with me on these boundaries until I'm feeling recharged? And, I'm hoping that this makes sense. And this will help me get back to a state of maximizing my productivity once again. And I think it's a way of you don't go in just saying, hey, I'm burnt out, and put it on your employer's plate. You say, I'm burnt out. Here's what's going on. Here's what I suggest. And it's something that's generally very well received by employers in the workplace. And it's very difficult to not support an employee in that situation. So really, really great question. The next question I see here from Dean is, how do you handle this in fast-growing businesses where there's lots of change and uncertainty? Great question. So what I would say here is that it's really important to identify your needs in this situation. So if you're somebody who really craves and seeks a lot of novelty and variety from the needs perspective, then you're going to have an easier time just generally adapting to this stuff. But if you're somebody who really seeks certainty and comfort and safety in the workplace, these are the individuals that are often most challenged in corporate culture that's most related to things like startups. And so you can sort of audit each of these major internal areas, and we can talk about, okay, how can I gain certainty in this situation specifically? So if I'm in my workplace, how can I have some form of certainty and communicate with supervisors, colleagues, bosses to gain more of that certainty as a whole? And it can be through asking for clearer project deadlines. It can be through clearer communication in different forms. It can be through, really diving into what structure can we set up in our meetings. And so what I would start by doing just in step 1 is be what are my unmet needs? And if it's certainty, stability, comfort, write out some ideas for how you would like to fulfill these needs. Okay. What would make you feel like these needs are met? And what I would then do is go to your colleagues and say, hey, I'm noticing that for me, I could really use a lot more structure. I want us to have clearer deadlines. I want us to have a more organized meeting structure. Here's what I would suggest for how we can do that, and try to brainstorm some suggestions, or even ask for a group to brainstorm suggestions together. You're going to appear as somebody who comes in and adds value to your workplace because you're trying to create more structure, more certainty, which is usually something that a startup company really needs in the first place. And you're really you're actively initiating instead of passively reacting. And so you really get to create some of your own certainty, create your own stability, create your own comfort. And you can also do this internally and independently too, just by creating your own structure of deliverables, your own to-do list, your own schedule, so that you have some of these needs met. And I would start there with number 1. Number 2, I would try to go a little bit into boundaries and just do a little assessment. Is there any boundary that I have that comes up for me that I'm kind of not realizing I need to set? And just setting our own boundaries and feeling like we can do that, we can speak up, gives us a sense of certainty. And then number 3, when we talk about limiting beliefs, what you'll see is these external experiences are what catalyzes these limiting beliefs at a subconscious level. So for example, if I have a limiting belief that says I feel out of control, then when I'm suddenly in a position where, there's all this stuff happening around me, maybe it triggers this I'm out of control limiting belief. And I feel like, oh my gosh, I have no control, over anything. And I start to feel powerless. And so again, when I start speaking up, creating structure for myself, actively initiating, setting these boundaries intentionally with other individuals, then all of a sudden I'm actually gaining more of that control back, and it's going to equilibrate the original triggering of that limiting belief to begin with. So what I want you guys to see here is that we have these 3 major categories, and when we just brainstorm some strategies for each one and just kind of isolate what the challenge is, suddenly we can put ourselves in a position as people where we're not helpless to our external environment, and we don't have to just passively react. We can be like, hey, this is what's missing. Here's a strategy. Here's an implementation plan. So I can initiate. Then I can feel empowered. I can feel relieved. I can feel fulfilled in my workplace. My subconscious feels a lot better. And then I can really tap into my full potential as a result. So great question. And then the last thing I will say here is there's just one other comment in here. And thank you, Daniela. And the last question I see here is just comment from Caitlin. Such an interesting webinar. I will definitely be more mindful of my behavior and my colleagues' behavior at work now. Amazing. Thank you. I'm so glad to hear that. Okay, so what I'm just going to wrap with is a huge thank you for everybody who was here for today. I know we went a little bit over time. So thank you for being here. Thank you for joining. If you would like to access a 30-day free pilot program, you can book that onboarding call with Melanie. That's right on the screen there, melanie@personaldevelopmentschool.com. And I hope everybody here enjoyed this today. And thank you so, so much for attending and for being here. And